In fiction, character deaths are events that occur during a story where a character passes away. Sometimes unexpectedly, sometimes alluded to by the author, and they can elicit a various series of responses. Dexter, as a show that technically has 11 seasons, has done character death often, and much of this has extended to the main cast. Now, this video will contain spoilers, so if you haven't seen the original Dexter, New Blood, Resurrection, or Original Sin, don't watch this, although I won't really go into Original Sin here. But, we expect Dexter's going to kill people as a serial killer. The first death of significance in terms of the main cast was Dokes in the second season. A lot of people feel like Dokes could have lived longer, and I agree with those people. In fact, I've even said that if Dexter were a shorter series, right, one that was only, let's say, 4 or 5 seasons, Dokes could have lived all the way through very easily. You could have had season 2 play out largely the same, except with him escaping the cabin and being framed. And then, season 3, maybe he's on like some hunt while Dexter is being questioned by people at Miami Metro. Then in this hypothetical season 4, people realize what Dexter is, and then he's season 5 would be like Dexter running and then getting caught and then being executed. So there were many ways that if the show were of a shorter length, Dokes could have survived. But the issues with Dokes' death really come down to two sticking points. One, he's killed by someone who's not Dexter, in Lila, to get out of making Dexter have to compromise his code for the sake of not getting caught. And a lot of people feel like her doing that cheapened the moral dilemma that Dexter was put in. This is something that we're going to see multiple other times, unfortunately, with this series, which is that the writers are so afraid for this character who, although he is a monster with noble traits, is still a monster, to do things which are unequivocally bad, where there's no question of his selfishness, and it is something that is not good. But the other issue is that getting rid of Dokes at the end of season 2 really only serves to drop the idea of someone knowing that Dexter's a killer and being adversarial to him for a couple of seasons before it's picked up again. And Dokes as a character really becomes a non-entity after season 3. I've done a recent rewatch of seasons 4, 5, and 6, and I can't recall a single time where Dokes was mentioned. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments section below. But what's really interesting, again, is that in these seasons in between, you would be remiss to think to forget that Dokes ever existed, because no one refers back to him. When Quinn ends up coming to the same conclusions about Dexter, it's completely unrelated to anything with Dokes, and it really just makes his death a way, more so a way to just get rid of the character who was like constantly suspecting Dexter of something before you play with essentially his same function to the story again in a couple of years with characters that people don't really like as much because they're not as well defined or whatever. So it's really, it doesn't, it's the issues with it again are that it's not Dexter who does it, and he has virtually no legacy. He's talked about very little between season 3 and 7, like just not at all for 3 straight years. Now the second time you get to a Dexter main character death that doesn't move the story forward is Rita. Now this death, when it happened, was one of the most shocking conclusions to a TV season people had ever seen. It was a big, huge twist. Oh my God. Because a lot of people rightfully felt that in taking out Dexter's love interest, who over the course of the first half of the show, we had seen his relationship progress from partners to, eventually being married and having a child together. A lot of us thought that her removal was going to signify some big, giant change in his character. And to season 5's credit, she gets mentioned frequently. But as you get to season 6 and season 7 and season 8, besides the occasional reference here or there, there's really not much of a lasting impact on Dexter. Unfortunately, Rita's passing, as iconic as it was, as shocking as it was, really only serves one purpose, which is to make it easier for Dexter to be on the prowl killing people without having a cover. Um, Essentially making it more simple for the writers. Just go, okay, we can just have him out at night, and then he can have his different nannies watch Harrison with no idea that he's out doing this stuff. Because what's even more maddening is that when you have like a major death like this, you would expect the characters who are going to get the most focus in terms of being stripped of their mother to be her children. But within 2 episodes of Rita's death, her kids are shipped off. We see them a handful of times for the rest of season 5, and then once in season 7, and that's it. And I even told one of my friends that you could watch a random episode of Dexter's season 6, 7, and 8, back when it was airing initially, and be convinced, if you saw the earlier seasons, that Rita divorced Dexter and took her kids with her, except Harrison. Like because she's referenced so little. Her kids are, again, out of the picture. The people that would be the most affected by it are not around to actually be seen developing. So it's just one of those things where, again, it was shocking when it happened, but the show doesn't really capitalize on her loss, on her absence. It's a way to make writing simpler and honestly stupider, because now you don't have that constraint of someone at home who's like, hey, Dexter, where were you last night? And I didn't see you in the bed. Hey, how come you didn't, pick up Aster from soccer practice? Just you don't see anything in this death in seasons after the 5th one that really makes it plain that like this was something that messed with Dexter. And it's unfortunate, and I could even do a whole video about it, because again, Dexter as a show, right? Like as a premise, the serial killer who works for the police. The idea is so genius, but it's also one that comes with an expiration date. And both Doak's and Rita's deaths are just ways to get rid of, one, a character who suspects him of being a killer, and then two, another character who may not suspect him, but certainly because of her growing proximity to Dexter, can be likely to trip him up or do something else that could lead to the uncovering of his double life. Now, I actually recorded a whole video about LaGuerta and just talking about, I think she's one of the most underrated Dexter characters. And I'm not saying she's one of my favorites, but I think people dislike her for reasons I don't really think are that fair to her as a character. But season 7, I would say of that second half of the show, is probably my favorite, and a big part of that is the suspicion by LaGuerta that Dokes was not the Bay Harbor Butcher. And really, my only regret with that season is that it's not the last one. I think that story could have been the conclusion. But in the season 7 finale, LaGuerta gets killed by Deb after Deb walks in on Dexter trying to take her out or set up a frame job. And again, it's a similar issue of Dexter being put in a position where he's like, all right, look, I got to break the code to kill this innocent person so that me and my sister are not taken down. And by having Deb do it, he gets scot-free out of having to make that decision, having to cross that moral dilemma. I've even seen some people who've pointed out that if they wanted to have, this be like this major turning point of like, just, oh man, this is the beginning of the end, they could have had Deb just close the door and let Dexter kill LaGuerta that way without having her be the one that has to pull the trigger, so as to actually make him complicit in her passing. More so than his sister, who's going to spend the next season spiraling. And it's like, I gave them credit with Dokes' passing in the sense that, okay, you're allowed to remove a character who suspects Dexter of being a serial killer and then have the whole police department just kind of like brush it aside maybe, once. But when you now have the person who not only suspected Dexter of being a killer, but told the entire force via her arrest of him that this guy, I think, is the serial killer that we believed was our deceased colleague. Now that she's gone, nobody is suspecting Dexter anymore. Nobody is wondering if he's the guy who did. I mean, at that point, the suspension of disbelief is just out the window. This is a clear ploy by the writers to bring back the plot of season 2 5 years later, and then rush it out of the way for this other uninteresting story in the mess that is season 8. And somebody could say, "Oh, you love LaGuerta so much." It's really more so about the practicality of it. Like if you're writing, and the Dexter writers knew when they wrote season 6 that they were renewed for 2 more years. If I'm writing the hypothetical last 2 seasons of a show, I would stick with the plot of season 7, have Deb walk in on what's going on, maybe shoot Dexter in the arm or do something else that kind of sort of aids the police, but not really. It lets him get away. Her and LaGuerta come to an understanding of each other where they've both been compromised, but they're going to like have each other's back from here on to catch her brother. And then the final season is them like teaming up to get Dexter. Because at least with that, there's a sense of, okay, you went through the same thing of having a colleague of Dexter suspecting him of being a killer, but you didn't have the same conclusion to it. And again, at least with Dokes' death, the idea was we want to keep this show going for some more years, and having him constantly suspecting and now knowing makes it impossible. But with LaGuerta's death, you're literally taking one of the most interesting endgame plots you have and burning it for the sake of, again, a stupider plot with Saxon and his mother and all that goofy crap in season 8 that we ended up getting instead. I don't even need to talk about Deb's death again. I made a whole video on how stupid it was and how it really is only there because Jennifer Carpenter wanted her character to die, and also they felt like, well, we can't kill off Dexter in the series finale because we need to milk this IP some more, so let's get rid of his sister. When you get to Resurrection, and I did my whole video about my issue with Batista's passing, which is that show was built to me as a several-year-long series that they were going to be able to plan out in advance, not like New Blood where it was just this little 10-episode thing and we have to try to wrap up set up a whole new setting and wrap it all up in 10 episodes, right down from our usual 12. But to bring in Batista, have him suspect Dexter just like Dokes and LaGuerta before him, and then get killed by some person who's like nominally on the side of Dexter, like Dokes and LaGuerta before him. Again, the issue here is that when Dokes was killed, even as someone who would love to have had him for another season or two, I said, okay, you know what? They want to do this show for some more years. They know that this is not feasible to keep him going if he has this suspicion or this confirmation. And with LaGuerta, I'm not defending that. I thought that was ridiculous. Again, the show is almost over. Why aren't we finally ripping this Band-Aid off? So when you get to Batista and you get rid of him right after he finds out who Dexter really is, and just completely rip us from having any chance for him to actually talk to Dexter about what's really been going on with him all these years, it's frustrating. That's all I can say. There's a stupid picture that gets thrown around by people. They're like, oh, in this photo, it's a season 1 promotional photo of like everyone wearing red except Dexter, and they're like, oh, everyone in this picture is dead. Well, I don't really know why they feel the need to point that out or to make it, because it's one of those things where they took a cutesy little promotional photo when the show was airing, and by virtue of the show not really having any way to shock people other than to just kill off the whole damn cast damn near by the end of it, this is just that's literally why the photo looks that way, because they don't know how to make the story feel like it's progressing or they've done something big besides killing off everybody around Dexter. So like I said, I'm not against killing characters off, but if it's a main character, which is what the cast of Miami Metro, with the ones who have their names, their actors' names in the title credits, are, you need to do it in a way where it matters, where you watch the next season, everybody's talking about this person, they died, and oh my God, this is a huge deal. And I've never felt that way with a single member of the Dexter cast getting killed off at all. You go and you watch season 3. They mentioned Dokes a few times after that. He doesn't exist for 3 years straight until we get season 7 with constant mentions on the flashback episode. You look at Rita, mentioned pretty consistently through season 5. After that, you would think she packed up the kids and left Dexter. look at LaGuardia. All she gets is a stupid bench, and I guess Batista is kind of like sad, mopey face a little bit, but no big deal. And then with Deb, she's again, that's all the way at the end, so I don't really count it because that's they did that knowing there would be nothing else or thinking there would be nothing else. So it's just unfortunate that I've yet to see a single one of these deaths actually advance the story. It is a cheap way to get out of having to make Dexter accountable for something, either by having somebody find out his identity, be it investigating cop or his spouse. And it's more frustrating when you consider that people, like, as I'm recording this, where season 2 of Resurrection is in production, people are gunning for Quinn to go to New York, and they suspect Dexter again, a nice little retread of season 5. And I guess he'll get killed right after he finds out who Dexter is by some ally, probably Harrison or whoever the hell. And again, it's like that's them doing the same thing for the 4th time, and people that don't want to criticize this show thinking that that's good writing. So it's sad. By the way, I didn't even get to mention Hannah. Like, that's somebody else where she is hyped up as being Dexter's true love, the one that understands him because she is also a killer. And then, oh, look, time skip, she gets stuffed in the refrigerator so that Harrison, can be on the hunt for Dexter without having anyone following him. So, just it's more like pointless death. Just it's sad. It really is. All these different characters can't be in this show anymore because we don't know how to tell any interesting story without fridging somebody.